The car turned onto Louisiana Street at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd always been punctual, a habit I'd developed over years of doing business when every minute late could cost a contract or a deal. The Texas sun was scorching the asphalt, turning the air into a thick, viscous mass that I had to literally cut through as I drove. The air conditioner in the car was on full blast, but my shirt was still sticking to my back. The heat in late August in Texas is not just a weather phenomenon, but a test of endurance. McKinney greeted me with familiar sights: neat front lawns, wide streets, and shady oak trees that offered at least some relief from the heat. This suburb of Dallas had always seemed too right to me, too perfect, like the setting for a movie about a happy American family. The white picket fences, the children's bicycles in the driveways, the flags in front of the houses, all this ostentatious decency irritated me with its artificiality. Here every house looked as if it had stepped off the pages of a country lifestyle magazine, every lawn mowed with mathematical precision, every flower bed planted according to the rules of landscape design. I drove slowly down the familiar road, involuntarily noting the changes in the neighborhood. The house on the corner had been repainted from beige to gray. There was a new decorative stone fence on Oak Street. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street from Justin's house, was still just as diligent about watering her roses, despite the ban on watering lawns during daylight hours. Some things never change, regardless of city ordinances or common sense. House number 1234 looked exactly the same as the day she bought it 5 years ago. A two-story red brick building with white columns and a wide porch, the classic colonial style that was so beloved in these parts. Justin had been deciding between this house and the other one on Elm Street for a long time. We spent an entire weekend driving around the listings, looking at floor plans, discussing the pros and cons of each option. He finally settled on this house. He said he loved the large living room and the natural stone fireplace, and there were 3 bedrooms, one for him and Vanessa, one guest bedroom, and one they planned to turn into a nursery. The nursery never materialized. In 5 years, they'd never once talked seriously about children, even though Justin was now 38 and Vanessa 34. Every now and then she mentioned how nice it would be to have children sometime in the future, but it sounded more like duty phrases than sincere plans. Maybe it was for the best, though. I wasn't sure they'd make good parents. Too infantile, too dependent on other people's opinions and other people's money, too incapable of long-term planning. I parked right in front of the house, in the same stamped concrete driveway I'd once helped pay for. Everything about this house had been paid for with my money, from the foundation to the shingles on the roof. $200,000 is not a small amount of money, even for me, a man who has spent his life knowing how to earn and save. But Justin was working at a small advertising agency at the time, making a measly $40,000 a year, and Vanessa was generally between jobs, as she delicately put it. In fact, she'd quit her job at the beauty parlor 6 months before their wedding and hadn't worked a day since. They rented a one-room apartment in a not-so-wealthy neighborhood where police car sirens were often heard at night and neighbors would get drunkenly disorderly until the morning. I decided to help the young family, thinking that having their own place would give them stability, make them grow up and take responsibility. My naivety knew no bounds at that time. I believed that material support could change a person's character, make him more mature and responsible. The delusion turned out to be complete and utter. Justin left the advertising agency 6 months after buying the house, citing creative differences with his superiors and incompatibility with the corporate culture. In fact, he was fired for systematic tardiness and failure to meet deadlines. Then there was a long series of temporary jobs, freelance projects that never brought the promised money, and long periods of idleness when he was exploring the possibilities of earning money on the internet or planning to start his own business. The plans changed every few months, from an online vintage clothing store to photography courses for beginners. Vanessa wasn't in a hurry to find a full-time job either, preferring to do yoga 3 times a week, attend personal growth courses, and learn the basics of aromatherapy. She often said that she was looking for her true calling, that she didn't want to just work for money, that it was more important to find a job that would bring spiritual fulfillment. In 5 years of searching, I had never found my true calling, but the list of courses and seminars I had taken was growing. I got out of the car and felt the hot air hitting my face, The temperature had long ago passed 40 degrees and the humidity made the heat almost unbearable. I had a thick folder of paperwork in my hands, tax papers that Justin needed to sign to formalize some financial transactions. No big deal, a routine that could wait until tomorrow or even next week. But Justin asked to bring the documents in person, saying that he couldn't come to my office. His car was supposedly under repair after a small accident. Although recently, just 3 days ago, I saw his new SUV at the Stonebriar Shopping Center. The shiny black car was parked in a parking lot near expensive stores, and I even noticed that the license plates matched the ones Justin showed in photos a month ago. Apparently, transportation was only an issue when he needed to go somewhere for business or to fulfill some obligation. For shopping and entertainment, the car worked fine. The oak tree next to the house has grown noticeably over the 5 years. When we'd bought the house, it had been a relatively young tree about 3 feet tall, but now its spreading branches almost reached the eaves of the roof and cast thick shade over half the lot. Justin had wanted to cut it down, saying the roots could damage the foundation over time and the fallen leaves would clog the gutters. But I talked him out of that decision. The tree provided precious shade, and in the Texas climate, that's worth more than any potential foundation problems. Besides, the oak was a healthy, sturdy oak with a thick crown, and to cut it down would be barbaric. I walked slowly down the path to the house, absently noting the details that had changed since my last visit 6 months ago. The paint on the shutters had begun to peel, especially on the south side, where the sun beat down particularly mercilessly. The gutters were in need of cleaning, with withered leaves and small branches sticking out of them. One of the light fixtures near the front door was cracked, probably from the hail that had fallen here earlier in the summer. The lawn in front of the house looked frankly unkept. The grass had yellowed from the heat and lack of watering. There were gaps in some places, and the beds along the path were overgrown with weeds. The rose bushes that Vanessa had planted so enthusiastically the first year had turned into thorny thickets without a single flower. Apparently, they didn't want to spend money on a gardener, and they didn't feel much desire to work on the plot themselves. But when we'd bought the house, Justin had vowed that he'd keep an eye on the grounds, that he had plans to create a beautiful garden. I put my foot on the front porch step and paused for a second, remembering the day of the housewarming party 5 years ago. The place was full of people then. Vanessa's relatives, a few of Justin's friends, neighbors who had come to get to know each other. Justin was in high spirits, showing everyone the house, talking about his plans, thanking me for my help. Vanessa was preparing treats and accepting congratulations. Everything looked very promising and promising. Something made me stop and not go any further up the stairs. Perhaps it was intuition, developed by years of doing business, when it was important to notice the smallest details and inconsistencies. Or maybe it was just a habit of noticing and analyzing things that had helped me make good decisions in life. I looked around the entrance area again, trying to figure out what was bothering me, what didn't look right. That's when I noticed a small wooden post to the left of the walkway, almost by the fence itself. It wasn't conspicuous, standing in the shade of a sprawling lilac bush, and could only be seen if you looked closely. On the post hung a neat white sign with red letters. Even at a distance of 10 meters, I could make out the familiar logo of the local real estate agency. My heart skipped a beat and then pounded with double the force. I took a few slow steps toward the pillar, feeling the ground go out from under my feet. But no, I wasn't mistaken. In front of me was a very ordinary realtor's sign with the name of the agency, a contact number, and large red letters that seemed to scream in my face. For sale. I stood in front of that sign and felt my insides grow cold, as if someone had poured ice water into my veins. The white plastic with red letters seemed unreal, like a mirage in the desert or a hallucination from the heat. But no, the sign was very real. I could even make out the fine print at the bottom with the agency's license number and web address. Prestige Realty is one of the most well-known companies in the area, specializing in luxury real estate. The house I bought for my son for $200,000 is for sale, a house that I had invested not only money in, but hopes that Justin would finally settle down and become a responsible adult. A house that I was paying for not only with a check, but with my own peace of mind, because that $200,000 was a significant portion of my savings at the time. I moved closer to the sign to examine the details. The sign was fresh, the plastic was still shiny, the paint not sunburned. So the sign had been installed recently, perhaps last week or even a few days ago. In the lower right corner, in small print, the price was $350,000. In 5 years, the value of the house had gone up $150,000. Not a bad profit for a man who hadn't invested a dime in the property. The agent's phone number was printed in large numbers under the company logo. Probably some energetic middle-aged woman with a perfect smile and a flawless manicure who knows how to sell sand to the desert dwellers and convince any buyer that this house will be the home of his dreams. There are thousands of such realtors in Texas, all using the same phrases about the beautiful neighborhood, great schools nearby, and rising property values. I slowly walked around the signpost trying to realize what was happening. My son, to whom I had given a house worth $200,000, had decided to sell it without even letting me know. Didn't call me, didn't ask for advice, didn't give me a reason. He just put it up for sale as if it were an old car or unwanted furniture. At the same time, he continues to call me regularly with requests for financial help. Then I need to pay for insurance, then urgently need money to repair the very car, which allegedly broke down. Over the past 5 years, I have spent much more on Justin and his family than the value of the house. Monthly transfers for running expenses, $2,000 and sometimes $3,000 each. Credit card payments when they went a little over the limit while shopping or on vacation. Money for urgent needs that arose with enviable regularity. The air conditioner broke down in the heat of the day. The roof leaked after a rainstorm. The water heater failed. I even roughly calculated in my mind. In 5 years, at least $150,000 flowed through my hands to them. Maybe even more, if you include birthday, Christmas, and wedding anniversary gifts. Vanessa loved expensive jewelry, and Justin constantly needed new gadgets for his many hobbies. He needed a professional camera for photography, expensive music equipment for his home recording studio, and a $3,000 bicycle for sports. Sports, by the way, lasted exactly 2 months. The bicycle still stands in the garage, covered with dust and cobwebs. Photography was also forgotten after 6 months. As soon as Justin realized that earning with this craft is much more difficult than he thought, the home recording studio had turned into a warehouse of expensive equipment that was only used for listening to music. The heat was becoming unbearable. My shirt was sticking to my back, and sweat was pouring into my eyes. I stepped into the shade of an oak tree and sat down on a small bench that stood by the fence. This bench had been placed by the neighbors, an elderly couple who liked to take evening walks in the neighborhood. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, if I'm not mistaken. Pleasant people who always said hello and inquired about business. I wonder what they think about the house next door being for sale. They must be aware of Justin's plans. In neighborhoods like this, news travels fast. Realtors go around to neighbors, warning them of upcoming showings, asking them not to clutter the street with cars on certain days. Maybe Mr. Collins was even talking to Justin about selling, finding out his reasons for moving. Or maybe my son made up a nice story about how they needed a bigger house, or that he'd gotten a lucrative job offer in another state. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed the agent's number from the sign. After the third ring, a woman with a pleasant voice and a Texas accent picked up. Prestige Realty, Deborah Wilson speaking. Can I help you? Hi. I'm calling about house number 1234 on Louisiana Street in McKinney. It's for sale. Oh yeah, it's a great house. The realtor's voice instantly became even friendlier. Are you interested in viewing it? This is a really lovely property in a great neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, large living room with fireplace, 2-car garage, and all at a very attractive price. Tell me, when was the house put on the market? Let me check. There was a rustling of papers. It was advertised on Monday, which is 4 days ago. The owner is very motivated to sell, so the price is very competitive. $350,000 for a house in this condition and in this neighborhood is really a bargain. 4 days ago, so the decision was made last week and the sign was put up on Monday. And all this time, Justin's been quiet, pretending like nothing's going on. He even called me yesterday about these documents that are in my car right now. He spoke in his usual tone, complained about the heat, told me some story about a neighbor's dog that barks all day. Do you know why the owner is selling the house? I asked, trying to keep my voice as neutral as possible. The owner said he wanted to move to another state for family reasons, Deborah replied. He needs to sell the house quickly, so he's willing to consider reasonable offers. If you're interested in a viewing, I can arrange one as early as tonight or tomorrow morning. Family circumstances. Interesting wording. I wonder which family it refers to. The one that doesn't know the house is for sale, or the one that lives in it and makes decisions without regard to who bought the house. Thanks. I'll think about it and call you back, I said and hung up. The sun had risen even higher, and the shadow of the oak tree had become quite small. The time was approaching 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the hottest time of the Texas day. Usually in weather like this, I was sitting in my air-conditioned office or at home by the pool, sipping iced tea. But today I was sitting on a stranger's bench in a stranger's neighborhood and contemplating how my only son felt about me. $200,000 for the house plus $150,000 for 5 years of maintenance. That's $350,000, exactly what Justin wants to get for the sale. It turns out that my role in this story was to ensure that he could live comfortably while the house rose in value. Now that the property has peaked in value, we can sell and move on to the next phase of life. No more explanations or unnecessary sentimentality. I got up from the bench and walked slowly back to my car. The documents in the folder no longer seemed important. What did it matter if Justin signed the tax papers or not, if he had already made the decision to change his life dramatically, and made that decision without any consultation with the man who had made that life possible? I wonder how much time elapsed between the decision and the installation of the plaque. A week, 2 weeks, a month? How many evenings had he and Vanessa sat around the kitchen table, discussing plans, choosing a realtor, setting a price, and not once in all that time did either of them think to call me and let me know what they were planning? Well, maybe they thought about it. Maybe they even debated whether to call me. And they came to the conclusion that they shouldn't. Why go to the trouble of asking unnecessary questions? It's better to bring it up when the deal is finalized. Then we can explain it all with family circumstances and the need for change. I reached the car and stopped next to the driver's door without opening it. The air conditioning had already gone out, and the interior must have turned into an oven. But I didn't want to leave. I wanted to go inside, to talk to Justin, to find out what was going on and why he was being so selfish. I wanted to hear an explanation that would probably only add to my frustration. But I didn't go to the door. Instead, I unlocked the car, threw the file folder in the back seat, and got behind the wheel. The engine started with the first turn of the key, the air conditioner humming at full blast. I put the car in reverse and slowly pulled out of the driveway and onto the street. A white sign with red letters flashed in my rearview mirror. For sale. 2 simple words that redefined 5 years of my illusions and hopes that adult children were capable of being grateful. I drove slowly down Louisiana Street, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at the house, which was getting smaller and smaller. The white sign with red letters was clearly visible even from a few blocks away, a bright spot against the green lawns and brown fences. Perhaps that's how the realtors intended it to be placed, to attract the attention of potential buyers driving by. Effective advertising aimed at quick results. A right turn onto Old Greenville Road, and Justin's house was around the corner. But the sign remained in front of his eyes as if imprinted in his memory. For sale were 2 words that, overnight, changed my perception of what I thought my son would be like. It turns out I had raised a man who was capable of selling a gift without even letting the giver know of his plans. The drive home was usually about 45 minutes, unless I hit traffic on the major highways. Today I took a roundabout way through the old part of McKinney. I wanted to be alone longer, to think things over without rushing. Besides, the direct route through downtown at this time of day was becoming a traffic jam of people rushing home from work. I turned onto Church Street and drove past the old houses that had been built at the beginning of the last century. The first settlers who founded the town in the 1840s lived here. Some houses still retained their original appearance. Wooden walls, wide verandas, high windows with carved platbands. Of course, most had been restored and modernized. But the spirit of old Texas was much stronger here than in the new suburbs with their impersonal architecture. Familiar places floated by. Chestnut Square Park with its century-old oaks, the old red brick courthouse, antique stores, and cafes where tourists gather on weekends. Justin and I had breakfast at one of these cafes about 10 years ago, when he had just graduated from college and was looking for a job. Back then, he was full of enthusiasm and plans for the future, talking about his ideas in advertising, dreaming of opening his own agency. I remember him explaining to me the difference between traditional advertising and digital marketing, drawing diagrams on napkins, giving me examples of successful campaigns. I listened with interest, even though I didn't understand half of the terms. The main thing was that my son was passionate about his business, saw prospects in it, and was ready to work and succeed. Then I thought that the investment in his education, 4 years at a decent university for $120,000, will pay off 100-fold. But enthusiasm was quickly replaced by disappointment. Work in an advertising agency was not as creative as imagined in his student dreams. Bosses demanded deadlines. Clients did not always accept revolutionary ideas. Colleagues competed for the best projects. Justin often complained about routine, that his talents were not valued, that the company was not ready for innovation. I thought at the time that these were the usual difficulties of adapting a young specialist to the real world of business. The traffic light at the intersection with Main Street turned red, and I stopped, watching the pedestrians on the sidewalk. A young couple with a baby stroller were crossing the road, taking their time and talking animatedly about something. The man looked about 35 years old, about the same age Justin was now. But unlike my son, this man was responsible for the family, pushing the stroller with one hand and holding his wife under his arm with the other, helping her walk on the uneven pavement. When Justin married Vanessa, I hoped married life would change him for the better. The responsibility for his wife, the plans for his children, the need to provide for his family. All of these things should have made him grow up. Instead, he just gained another dependent who shared his outlook on life and supported him in his belief that the world owed them something. The wedding cost me $35,000, not because I wanted to spend that kind of money, but because Vanessa had dreamed of a dream wedding at a country club with fresh flowers, professional photographers, and a dinner for 150 people. Justin then earned less than $3,000 a month, and Vanessa's parents lived in a small town in Oklahoma and barely made ends meet after her father retired. Naturally, organizing the wedding fell on my shoulders. Not only did I pay for all the expenses, but I spent weeks finding the right vendors, negotiating with venue managers, and dealing with 1,000 little issues. I remember how Vanessa changed her mind about the color of the tablecloths a week before the wedding, and I had to urgently look for a replacement. Or how 2 days before the ceremony, it turned out that the ordered flowers did not match the shade of the bride's dress. The traffic light switched to green, and I continued driving. On the right, I glimpsed the old Louisiana movie theater, where my first wife and I used to frequent when we were young. Back then, it was a trendy place where people came from neighboring towns to see new movies on the big screen. Now the building looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the neon sign didn't work, and there were boards hanging from the windows. Time is ruthless to everything, to buildings, to people, to relationships. Justin was then 8 years old when his mother and I divorced, a difficult age when a boy especially needs stability and the understanding that his parents love him no matter what. I tried to spend as much time with him as possible. Every weekend, all school vacations, going on vacations together. Perhaps it was then that I began to compensate for the lack of daily communication with material gifts and entertainment. Every meeting with my son turned into a holiday. Trips to amusement parks, expensive toys, dinners in good restaurants. I wanted him to remember the time spent with me as something special and joyful. I did not realize at the time that in this way I was forming in the child the idea that love is measured by the amount of money spent. His mother didn't discourage it either. Elizabeth had always been a practical woman, and if her ex-husband was willing to spend money on her son, why not? It relieved her of a lot of expenses and allowed her to put her own money to other uses. Plus, Justin came back in high spirits after every weekend with me, which made her life easier. Gradually, I became the kind of parent that people turned to for money, not advice or support. When Justin needed a new bike, he called me. When the school organized an expensive trip, it was me again. Problems with grades or conflicts with classmates were solved by his mother, and I was the source of funding for all material needs. This pattern of relationships continued even after Justin became an adult. Even after he got married and got his own house, he continued to see me as an inexhaustible source of financial help. The calls always began with polite inquiries about health and business, but quickly turned to the point of needing money for this or that. I turned onto Hardin Street and drove past the mall, where I often saw Justin and Vanessa shopping. They loved to spend their Saturdays there, going from store to store, picking out clothes, electronics, and home decor items. Naturally, most of their purchases were paid for with credit cards, which I then helped pay off. After all, a young family has so many needs, and income doesn't yet allow them to cover everything on their own. I remember one particularly telling episode 3 years ago. Justin called me in a panic. It turned out that he and Vanessa spent $8,000 more on credit cards than they could afford. It happened gradually, imperceptibly, a few $100s here and there. New living room furniture, vacations to California, dinners at restaurants, clothes, beauty treatments for Vanessa. When the bills came in, it turned out that the minimum monthly payments ate up almost half of Justin's income, and he still had to pay for utilities, groceries, gasoline. He asked for a 6-month loan, promising to live more frugally and pay me back gradually. I gave him the $8,000, of course, but no one ever tried to pay it back. 6 months later, the story repeated itself. Then another year later. Each time the sums got bigger and the explanations more and more inventive. The water heater broke down and needed urgent repairs. Vanessa needed expensive medical treatment. Then the car needed expensive repairs after an accident, which, by the way, was caused by Vanessa herself not giving way at an intersection. Each time I helped, and each time I was promised that it was the last time, that they had learned to control costs, that it would not happen again. And each time, a few months later, there was a new call with a new request for help. I began to realize that I had become not a father, but an ATM machine that never refuses to dispense cash. The saddest part was that I saw almost no gratitude. Sure, Justin always said thank you, and Vanessa sent Father's Day cards. But it was a formal courtesy, like thanking the cashier at the store for a purchase. None of them saw my help as anything special. It was as natural as the rising sun or the changing of the seasons. Moreover, over time, I noticed that my gifts and financial support were taken for granted. If I gave less than expected or refused to pay for a particularly expensive whim, Justin's voice was tinged with disappointment and even resentment. It was as if I had to provide them with a certain standard of living, and any restrictions on my part were seen as an injustice. The last time that happened was only a month ago. Vanessa wanted to remodel her kitchen, new cabinets, natural stone countertops, a professional stove. The estimate was $25,000. Justin called me with this request as a matter of course. When I told him that the amount was too much and that we should save up at least half of it first, he took offense. "Dad, we're not asking for money for nothing," he said. "A kitchen is an investment in a house. It increases the value of the property. Besides, the kitchen we have now is obsolete. It's almost 10 years old. 10 years for a kitchen is morally obsolete." Interesting logic for someone who had never earned enough to buy even a used car without a loan. But that's how Justin perceived reality. Everything around him had to meet modern standards. And if there wasn't enough money for that, Dad would help. I drove into my neighborhood, Preston Hollow, one of the most expensive in Dallas. It was home to doctors, lawyers, and successful businessmen, people who earned their fortune by their own labor and knew how to appreciate the results of that labor. Unlike some of their children, who saw their parents' money as an inexhaustible resource, my house stood at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by tall trees and well-tended gardens. A 3-story white stone building with columns and wide terraces. The house I had bought 15 years ago at the height of my career, when the business was making a steady profit and the future seemed cloudless. I had planned then that children and grandchildren would gather here, that family traditions would be passed down from generation to generation. The grandchildren never came, and the only child saw the house more as a place to come for money than as a family home. Justin was rarely here, and that was mostly on holidays or when he needed a particularly large sum of money that wasn't convenient to ask for over the phone. I drove into the yard and stopped in front of the garage. The automatic gate slowly lifted, opening the way into the cool darkness of the room. There were two other cars next to my car, an older pickup truck that the gardener sometimes drove, and a sports car that I hardly used. Too many cars for one person, but I couldn't bring myself to sell anything. Perhaps because they reminded me of a time when life seemed full of possibilities. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a while, thinking about what had happened today. The white sign with red letters continued to stand in front of my eyes as if burned into my retinas. For sale. The house I gave my son is for sale without my knowledge. And this is after 5 years of constant financial support, after hundreds of thousands of dollars spent to ensure their comfortable life. I guess it's time for something to change in our relationship. It was time to stop being an ATM and become a father who knew how to say no. But first I had to figure out if I was ready to hear resentment and recriminations in return for supposedly stopping taking care of my own family. The house greeted me with coolness and silence. The air conditioner ran quietly, keeping the temperature at a comfortable 22 degrees, and the thick white stone walls kept out the Texas heat. I walked into the office, tossed my car keys on the desk, and sank into the leather chair I'd bought 10 years ago. Good things last a long time if they're properly cared for and not replaced every year on a whim. Outside the window was a swimming pool with crystal clear water and a well-tended garden where the gardener mowed the lawns and watered the flower beds every week. Everything here was set up to last for years to come. I always thought that a house should be a fortress, a place where you can hide from the outside world and its problems. But today, even the walls of my own house could not protect me from the bitter realization of how selfish and ungrateful my son had grown up. On the table was a folder of papers I'd never given Justin. The tax papers he'd asked me to sign, a routine formality for filing annual financial statements. But now those documents seemed like a symbol of our relationship. I'd always been the one who handled the financial matters, and Justin was the one who just put his signature where it was needed. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a notebook with phone numbers. Ronald Hughes had been my assistant for 12 years and knew the details of my financial affairs better than I did. More precisely, he was not just an assistant, but the manager of all my assets, bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate. A smart, reliable man with an economics degree and an impeccable reputation. I knew the phone number by heart, but I still checked the entry in my book. A habit of accuracy developed over years of doing business. Ronald always answered quickly. It was one of the conditions of our cooperation. No matter what time of day or day of the week, he had to be available for communication. Ronald Hughes speaking, came a familiar voice after the second ring. Ron, it's Walter. I have an urgent errand for you. Go ahead, Mr. Crane. What is it? Ronald never asked unnecessary questions or demanded explanations for my decisions, another quality for which I valued him. In the business world, it's important to have people who follow instructions quickly and without unnecessary discussion. We need to stop all regular transfers to Justin Crane and Vanessa Crane's accounts immediately. Absolutely everything. Monthly payments, insurance payments, loan repayments, whatever's in there, and block the credit cards that are linked to my accounts. There was a brief pause in the phone. Ronald was apparently going through the records in his computer, clarifying the details of all the current transactions. Mr. Crane, if I may clarify, to stop from today or from the beginning of next month. And what about the payments already scheduled for this week? As of this minute, anything that can be canceled, cancel it immediately. What's already gone, let it go, but don't schedule anything new. And make sure you notify the banks to block your credit cards. I don't want any new transactions going through. I got it. I'll get right on it. Mr. Crane, what do I do if they come to me for clarification? That's a good question. Justin and Vanessa knew Ronald and sometimes called him directly when they couldn't reach me, especially when it came to urgent payments or technical questions about transfers. Tell them you are following my direct orders and are not authorized to discuss details. If they want clarification, they can call me personally. Okay, I'll be done within the hour. Is there anything else that needs to be done? That's it for now. Thank you, Ron. I'll email you a progress report. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The decision had been spontaneous, driven by the emotion of the plaque I'd seen. But the more I thought about it, the more right it seemed to me. It was time to stop indulging the selfishness of a grown man and his wife, who were used to living at other people's expense. Over the years of helping Justin, I'd spend enough money to buy a nice house in a decent neighborhood, or invest in stocks and get a steady income, or just put it in the bank at an interest rate and have a secure old age. Instead, all that money went to support a lifestyle that my son couldn't provide on his own. I got up from the table and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. Miguel the gardener was working near the rose bed, carefully trimming the withered flowers and watering the roots. A hard-working man in his 50s who supported a large family, a wife and 4 children. He never asked for an advance payment or additional payment, and always did the work qualitatively and on time. His monthly salary was less than half of what I regularly remitted to Justin. Miguel arrived every morning in an old pickup truck, worked under the blazing sun, and saved every dollar so that the children could get an education. The oldest son was already in technical college as an auto mechanic. The middle son was graduating from high school with excellent grades. This man understood the value of money and the importance of hard work. Unlike my son, who felt it was the world's responsibility to provide him with a comfortable existence. The phone on the desk rang. I looked at the caller ID. Justin was calling. Ronald must have already started following my instructions, and the first results were not long in coming. I didn't pick up the phone. Let him leave messages on the answering machine. I'd be interested to hear what he'd say when he realized the financial faucet had been turned off. After the 5th ring, the answering machine went off, and my son's excited voice came on. "Dad, it's Justin." "There's something wrong with my bank cards. The ATM says that transactions are temporarily suspended. Please call me back as soon as you hear the message. It could be a technical error, but it's better to get it sorted out quickly." Technical error? Of course it is. It's a lot easier to assume a glitch in the banking system than it is to assume that Dad could have made some kind of independent decision. In 5 years, I'd never turned down financial aid, so Justin hadn't even considered the possibility. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of iced tea. Outside the window, the thermometer read 42 degrees, a typical Texas August temperature. In this weather, I wanted to be in an air-conditioned room and drink more fluids. The kitchen was spacious and modern, with marble countertops and professional appliances. Vanessa would probably envy a kitchen like this. She had always dreamed of something like this. The funny thing is, my kitchen cost about the same amount they wanted to spend to renovate theirs. But I had been working on this kitchen for several years, saving up, planning every detail, and they wanted to get it all at once, without making any effort to save up. The phone rang again. It was Justin again. I looked at my watch. It had only been 10 minutes since the first call. Apparently, the panic was building faster than I'd anticipated. Again, the answering machine. Again, a worried voice. "Dad, I need to talk to you right away. The bank has blocked all the cards. They say it's by order of the account holder. I don't understand what's going on. Call me immediately." For the first time in many years, I could hear real emotion in my son's voice. Not the usual relaxation of a man confident in the future, but confusion and panic. Perhaps only now he was beginning to realize how much he depended on my financial support. I went back into the office and turned on the computer. New email messages appeared on the screen. Ronald had already sent a detailed report on the work he had done. All regular transfers canceled, credit cards blocked, automatic payments stopped. Efficiency I've always appreciated in business relationships. According to the report, Justin and Vanessa's monthly living expenses were $4,200. Direct transfers to their accounts, car and home insurance payments, paying off minimum credit card payments, cell phone and internet charges, plus unforeseen expenses that came up every few weeks, an average of another $1,500 a month. That works out to over $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. In 5 years, $300,000, not counting the original cost of the house. A sum that could be used to buy several apartments for rent and receive passive income for the rest of his life. The phone rang a 3rd time. Now it was Vanessa calling. Her voice sounded even more anxious than her husband's. "Walter, it's Vanessa. Justin said you were having some trouble with the banks. I was at the store and couldn't pay with my card. A very embarrassing situation. Please deal with it as soon as possible. We've never broken anything. We've always been careful with our money." Careful with money, a woman who hasn't worked a day in 5 years and spent other people's money on beauty treatments and expensive clothes, considers herself careful with money. Each person apparently has a different idea of financial responsibility. I opened my credit card statements for the past few months. Restaurants, clothing stores, beauty salons, jewelry stores. The average restaurant check is $150 for two people. A dress for Vanessa is $400. Massage and cosmetic procedures, $200 per session. And that's just the small expenses that they didn't even think it was necessary to discuss with me. Big purchases were agreed upon in advance. But the approval usually consisted of Justin calling me and telling me he needed to buy something important. He didn't ask permission, he informed me. The difference is fundamental. In the first case, you can say no. In the second case, you can only agree or spoil the relationship by refusal. Outside the window, it began to get dark. Texas summer days are long, but by 7 p.m., the sun was already slipping toward sunset. The shadows from the trees had gotten longer, and the air had cooled a bit, though the temperature was still above 35 degrees. Miguel finished his work in the garden and stacked the tools neatly in his pickup truck. Tomorrow he would come again and continue to take care of my property, reliably, efficiently, without unnecessary requests or complaints. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Justin and Vanessa called alternately, leaving increasingly agitated messages on the answering machine. The tone changed from bewilderment to concern, and then to outright panic. Apparently, they were beginning to realize the magnitude of the problem. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the answering machine had accumulated 15 messages. Justin demanded an immediate explanation. Vanessa complained about the inconvenience and asked for an urgent solution. Both of them were talking about some urgent payments that needed to be made in the next few days. Neither of them questioned why I might have made such a decision. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the calls became more frequent. Every 5 to 10 minutes, the phone was bursting with calls from either Justin or Vanessa. Sometimes they'd call at the same time, probably trying to reach me from different phones, hoping I'd answer at least one of the numbers. The messages got more and more desperate. Justin swore they'd done nothing, that they'd always been grateful and careful. Vanessa was crying into the phone, saying she didn't understand what was going on, that they had obligations to people. Both demanded an immediate conversation and explanation. By 10 p.m., I had stopped counting the calls. The phone rang almost continuously. As soon as the answering machine finished recording one message, a new call would begin. I turned off the sound and left only the light indication. A flashing red light showed that someone was trying to call. At 11:30, I checked the missed call counter. 87 calls in the last 4 hours. Almost a call every 3 minutes. They must have been taking turns calling, keeping the phone warm. This intensity of communication with me hadn't happened in all 5 years of their married life combined. The funny thing was that one call a month was always enough for them to get money. And when the funding source dried up, it took 87 calls in one evening. That said a lot about the priorities in our relationship and what really interested them in communicating with me. I shut down the computer, closed the file folder, and headed for the bedroom. Tomorrow would be an interesting day. Justin and Vanessa would probably come in person to find out what was going on and how to get things back on track. But there would be no more back to normal. The for sale sign changed the rules of the game once and for all. The morning began with the phone ringing at 7:30. I woke up to the insistent ringing that cut through the morning silence of the house like a fire engine siren. The first rays of the Texas sun were shining through the thick curtains, promising another sultry day. I looked at the caller ID, and it was Justin. Apparently, the sleepless night hadn't brought him any clarity. I didn't pick up the phone. Instead, I got out of bed, showered, and had a leisurely breakfast on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the trees. Birds chirped in the branches of the century-old oaks. The garden sprinklers worked automatically, watering the lawns and flower beds. An ordinary morning in an ordinary house of an ordinary man who had finally decided to stop being an ATM machine for grown children. The phone rang 6 more times during breakfast, alternating between Justin and Vanessa, sometimes simultaneously. They were probably coordinating, hoping the massive bombardment of calls would force me to answer. New messages piled up on the answering machine, each more desperate than the last. At 8 in the morning, I turned the answering machine on full volume and listened to the messages left overnight. There were 23 in all. Apparently, they had given the phone a break after midnight. The first messages sounded confused. The last one sounded downright panicked. "Dad, it's Justin. It's 2 in the morning, and you're not answering your phone. I can't figure out what's going on. If this is some kind of mistake, let's figure it out in the morning. If you're mad at me about something, you can tell me straight up. But blocking cards without an explanation is too cruel. Cruel. Interesting choice of words. So cutting off financial support is cruel, but selling a donated house without notifying the donor is normal adult and responsible behavior. Walter, it's Vanessa. I realize it's late, but I can't sleep. We have important payments tomorrow that we can't make without access to our cards. Mortgage, insurance, utilities. If the banks don't unlock the cards by tomorrow, we'll be in arrears. Please call in the morning and resolve this issue. They did not have a mortgage. I bought the house with cash. Insurance and utilities were paid from my accounts automatically. The only real expenses they incurred on their own were groceries, gasoline, and entertainment. But even those were partially covered by monthly transfers to their personal accounts. Dad, I don't know what we did wrong. If it's the money you're transferring to us, we're willing to discuss reducing the amounts. Maybe we really have started spending too much, but a complete lockdown is a last resort. Let's meet and talk like adults. Like adults, Justin finally said the right words. The only problem is that adults don't live on full support from their parents at 38. Adults don't sell donated real estate without letting the donor know. Grown-ups solve their own problems, not call their dad every time they run out of money in their wallet. By 9:01 a.m., it was clear that the calls weren't going to stop on their own. Justin and Vanessa called every 5 to 10 minutes, leaving increasingly long and emotional messages. The tone of their voices changed from pleading to demanding, from confused to indignant. Apparently, the shock of the unexpected financial problems was gradually replaced by anger at the one who had created these problems. Dad, this is just wild, Vanessa shouted into the phone. You can't just cut us off from the money without an explanation. We have commitments, plans, agreements with people. I have a hair appointment. We've booked dinner at a restaurant for tonight. Justin has to put gas in the car. You're putting us in an impossible position. Hairdresser, restaurant, gas for the car. That's what my sister-in-law was primarily concerned about. Not why the financial support had stopped, but how to pay for the usual pleasures now. None of them were interested in what could have caused me to make such a drastic decision. Walter, I demand an explanation. Justin's voice was already sounding aggressive. You have no right to do this to us. We're your family, not some strangers. If you're having money problems, just say so, and we'll understand. But this game of silence is unacceptable. Money problems. Another interesting interpretation of the situation. My son suggests that I may have gone bankrupt or gotten into a difficult financial situation. Even so, he is not interested in my well-being, but in restoring cash flow. Not one message asked how I was doing or if I needed help. Around 10 in the morning, the nature of the messages changed. Apparently, Justin and Vanessa held a meeting and came up with new tactics. Instead of panic and outrage, they switched to trying to figure out specific reasons for my behavior. Dad, it's Justin. Vanessa and I have been up all night wondering what could have upset you. The only thing that comes to mind is that maybe you found out that we put the house on the market. If that's the case, let's talk about it. We have a good reason to move. Finally. It took my son almost 24 hours to guess the possible connection between the for sale sign and the withdrawal of financial support. Although I was sure he'd seen my car outside the house yesterday, so he knew I was visiting and could assume he noticed the for sale sign. Walter, if you're worried about selling the house, you've got it all wrong, Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice as reasonable as possible. We're not going to take your money and disappear. It's just that this house has become too small for us, and real estate prices are very high right now. We want to sell it and buy something more suitable for our needs. The house is getting small. A 3-room house with an area of 200 square meters has become too small for a family of 2 people who do not even plan to have children. And the 3rd room is used as storage for sports equipment and music equipment that I paid for and hardly ever use. Dad, we're willing to postpone the sale if it bothers you that much. We can take the house off the market today and discuss the situation calmly. But please unblock the cards. Without them, we just can't function properly. We can't even buy groceries. A grown man of 38 and his wife have no money of their own, not even for groceries. But they have plans to sell $350,000 worth of real estate, a logic only available to people who are used to living solely on other people's dime. I poured myself another cup of coffee and went out onto the terrace. The morning chill had already changed to the familiar Texas heat, but it was still comfortable in the shade. Miguel arrived at his usual time and began work on the far side of the garden. A reliable man who showed up every day at the appointed time and did his job well, expecting no special thanks or extra bonuses for it. The phone continued to ring every few minutes. Justin and Vanessa were clearly determined not to give up and pursue an answer at all costs. Their persistence would have been admirable if it had been directed at finding a job or developing their own business. But all of that energy was being spent just to regain access to other people's money. Walter, I understand that you're upset about our decision to sell the house. Vanessa tried a new approach. But we're not children to ask permission for every move. The house is in Justin's name, and technically we have the right to use it. The other thing is, we should have let you know as a courtesy. That's our mistake, and we're willing to make it right. Technically, we have the right. That's what relationships are all about. Legal technicalities instead of human feelings. The house was given with the hope that it would help the young family become more responsible and independent. Instead, it's become an asset to be disposed of at will. Dad, if you think we're ungrateful, we're not, Justin said in another message. We really appreciate everything you do for us. It's just that sometimes we make bad decisions. All people make mistakes. The important thing is to be able to admit mistakes and correct them. Admitting mistakes and fixing them. Pretty words with no concrete action behind them. In 5 years, I've never seen Justin or Vanessa admit to a mistake and change their behavior. Usually admitting mistakes was just a way to be forgiven and continue on with life as it was. By noon, the number of missed calls had passed 100. The messages were getting more and more desperate. Justin and Vanessa began to realize that the situation was more serious than they had originally thought. This was not a temporary technical problem or a manifestation of short-term anger that could be settled with an apology. Dad, I'm ready to come over and explain myself in person, Justin said, but I need gas to get to you. And there's no money for gas because of the blocked cards. Can you unblock at least one card for a small amount? Or can you wire $50 to my account? I promise I'll only spend it on the road. $50 to drive from McKinney to downtown Dallas, even though the tank of his SUV holds 80 liters and the fuel consumption is about 1 liter per 10 kilometers. It didn't take more than $20 to get there and back. But even in a desperate situation, my son couldn't resist trying to get a little more than was realistically necessary. Walter, we realize what we did was wrong, Vanessa cried into the phone. We'll take the house off the market right now, if that will make you feel better. But please don't punish us so harshly. We are ready to change our behavior, to become more responsible, to work harder. Give us a chance to make things right, to become more responsible, to work harder. Promises I've heard dozens of times over the years. Every time there have been financial problems or I've expressed dissatisfaction with their lifestyle, the same words have been uttered. And each time, as soon as the crisis passed, everything went back to normal. I looked at my watch, 1:30 in the afternoon. It had been almost 20 hours since the cards had been blocked and the transfers stopped. In that time, Justin and Vanessa had never once questioned whether they'd been behaving correctly all these years. They were only interested in restoring the status quo and getting back to their normal lifestyle at my expense. The phone rang again. This time it was from an unfamiliar number. I decided to answer it. Perhaps it was a stranger who really needed to talk business. Mr. Crane? The unfamiliar female voice sounded formal. This is Deborah Wilson from Prestige Realty. We spoke yesterday about the house on Louisiana Street. Realtor. I wonder why she's calling. Yesterday, I identified myself as a potential buyer, but I didn't leave my phone number. Go ahead. The owner of the house asked me to contact you. Justin Crane said you're his father and that you're interested in buying the property for investment purposes. He's willing to consider a family deal on special terms. A family deal with special terms. My son decides to sell me my gift and call it a family deal. That's cynical, even by Justin's standards. Thanks for the information, I said. But I wasn't interested in that property anymore. I hung up and muted the phone. Enough listening to panic messages and trying to manipulate my feelings for the day. It was time to mind my own business and let Justin and Vanessa deal with the consequences of their decisions on their own. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Through the office window, I could see Justin's familiar black SUV pull into my driveway. So they'd found gas for the trip after all, despite the blocked cards and no money in their accounts. Either they'd borrowed from friends or there was still fuel left in the car from the last gas station. In any case, the decision to come in person was the right one. It would have been difficult to have this conversation over the phone. Justin and Vanessa got out of the car. The son looked worried and a little confused, an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. Usually Justin exuded the calm confidence of a man who knows that all problems will solve themselves or with Dad's financial support. Today that confidence was noticeably shaken. Vanessa was wearing an expensive summer dress and heels, not the best choice for the Texas heat, but she always tried to look impeccable. Even in a crisis, image remained her priority. Her hair was styled to perfection, her makeup professionally applied, her jewelry tastefully selected. All of this required time and money, which they said were woefully lacking. They didn't head for the front door right away. At first, they stood by the car, talking quietly about something. Probably they were discussing the tactics of the upcoming conversation, assigning roles, deciding who would say what. I watched them from the window, not hurrying to go out to meet them. Let them get their heads together first and decide how they would explain their behavior. Justin was the first to head toward the house, Vanessa walking beside him, lightly tucking him under her arm. Whether it was a gesture of support or an attempt to show family unity, it was hard to tell. They stepped up onto the porch and pressed the bell button. A melodic chime echoed throughout the house, the same tune that had been playing for 15 years since I'd moved here. I took my time opening the door. Let them stand there for a while, thinking about what they were going to say. They'd left over 100 messages on my answering machine in the last 24 hours, but not one of them was a sincere admission of guilt or an attempt to understand my point of view. Only demands for explanations and requests to restore financial support. The call came again, this time longer and more persistent. Apparently they were running out of patience. I slowly walked down the stairs and opened the door. Justin and Vanessa were standing on the doorstep, trying to play it cool, but I could feel the tension in their every move. "Hi, Dad," Justin said, trying to smile. "We decided to come in person to talk things over. Apparently there's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That's an interesting way to describe a situation where a son sells his father's house without telling him. But I didn't want to start with the accusations right away. It was better to hear what version of events they had prepared. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. It's cooler in the house." We went into the living room, a large room with large windows and comfortable furniture. I gestured for them to take a seat on the couch, but I remained standing by the window. The position of superiority was important for the upcoming conversation. I wanted them to feel like beggars, not equal negotiators. "Walter," Vanessa began, trying to sound as friendly as possible, "we understand that yesterday's blocking of the cards is related to what you learned about the house being on the market. If that's the case, we're ready to explain." "I'm listening," I replied briefly, making no attempt to make it easy for them. Justin coughed and took a more formal pose. Apparently, they had decided in advance that he, as the owner of the house and the main beneficiary of the financial aid, would be the one to explain. "Dad, we did put the house on the market," he said, looking me in the eye. "But it's not what you might think. We're not going to take the money and spend it on nonsense. We have a serious plan." A serious plan. In their 5 years together, Justin and Vanessa had many serious plans. A photography studio that would bring in a steady income, an online vintage clothing store, a pregnancy yoga class that Vanessa was going to teach. None of these plans were realized beyond the discussion and budgeting stage. "So what's your plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We want to move to Austin," Vanessa said, perking up. "There are a lot more opportunities for creative people there. Justin can freelance in design, and I plan to open a yoga and wellness counseling studio." Austin, the capital of Texas, a city of musicians, artists, and startups. A place where young people move to for inspiration and opportunity. The problem is that my son is 38 years old and his wife is 34, an age when it's time to realize plans, not look for new places to nurture them. "How much does it cost to move?" I asked. Justin and Vanessa looked at each other. Apparently this was a key question, and they were preparing to answer it in advance. The house in Austin is about the same price we'd get for selling ours, Justin said. Plus, we'll need to rent space for Vanessa's studio, buy equipment, and pay for the move. All in all, we'll need an extra 40 or 50,000 to get started. 40 to 50,000 to get started. And that's after we get 350,000 from the sale of the house. That's almost $400,000 for another attempt to find ourselves. The amount with which you can buy several apartments for rent and receive a stable passive income. And what happens if the plan doesn't work? I asked. If the yoga studio doesn't work out and freelancing doesn't bring in enough income? This question clearly caught them off guard. In 5 years, I had never once asked about backup plans or the possible risks of their endeavors. I usually just gave them the money and hoped it would work out this time. Dad, you make it sound like we're failures, Justin took offense. Yes, we haven't done well in the past, but that's because we've been living in the wrong place. McKinney is a place for families with kids, not for creative people. Austin has a whole different atmosphere, different opportunities, different opportunities. The classic excuse of people who don't want to admit their own responsibility for failure. It's always the fault of place, time, circumstances, anything but lack of hard work and perseverance. Walter, Vanessa intervened, we realize that our request may seem unreasonable, but think about it. If we sell the house, we can pay you back some of the money you've invested in us. And then when business picks up, we can get the rest of it back. Get the money back. In 5 years, they never once offered to pay back even a small portion of the ongoing financial aid. All the promises of repayment were only made in times of crisis when they needed another batch of money. And how much exactly are you going to pay me back? I asked. Justin had clearly not expected such a direct question. He hesitated, looked at Vanessa, then back at me. Well, we were thinking maybe 50,000? After we bought the house in Austin and paid for the move, we'd have about that much left over. 50,000 of the 400 I've spent on it over the years. 12.5% return. And that's assuming they actually want to part with the money rather than find a way to spend it on something necessary for the new business. Why did you decide to sell the house without consulting me? I asked the big question. It was Vanessa's turn to look uncomfortable. She fixed her hair, smoothed her dress, and tried to find the right words. We didn't want to bother you too soon, she said. We planned to find a buyer first, get the paperwork done, and then let you know. We thought it would be better to get it out in the open, not to bore you with all the details of the process. Get it in front of you. That's exactly what they did. Decided to sell the gift without asking the donor's opinion and only announce it after the transaction was finalized. A convenient position for people who are used to making unilateral decisions at someone else's expense. Dad, you have to understand, Justin tried to take the offensive. We are not children to ask permission for every step. The house is in my name. Legally, it belongs to me. I have the right to use it. Legally, it belongs to me. So much for the legal formalities of the relationship. Human gratitude, family ties, basic politeness, all these things were less important than the record of ownership. All right, I said. Then explain to me why you need my financial support if you are such independent and self-sufficient people. That question stumped them. Justin and Vanessa looked at each other again, obviously not knowing what to say. To admit dependence on my money was to admit the hypocrisy of their position of independence, and they weren't ready to give up their support. Walter, it's not the same thing, Vanessa tried to explain. It's one thing to make decisions about your own life, but it's another thing to have material support from a loved one. It's normal in families when parents help their children. Helping the kids. Justin is 38 years old and has been married for 5 years. At what age does Vanessa think children should become independent? 40, 50? Or should parental support continue as long as the parents are physically able to earn money? Daddy? Justin changed tactics and tried to push pity. You realize we can't go without support right now. We have no savings, no stable income. If you stop helping us, we won't survive. We won't. A dramatic exaggeration, typical of people who are used to getting everything without effort. In reality, they would have to find a job, save money on entertainment, and learn to live within their means. Unpleasant, but doable for healthy adults. What's stopping you from getting a job? I asked. What job? Vanessa was indignant. I haven't worked in 5 years. I have no actual experience. And Justin is a creative person who needs the right environment for self-actualization, not some random job for money. A creative person who needs the right environment. In 5 years, this creative person has not created a single significant project, has not earned a dollar with his talent, has not demonstrated any results of creative activity, but he knows for sure that a regular job is not right for him. The conversation reached an impasse. Justin and Vanessa demanded the restoration of financial support, citing family obligations in difficult financial situation. At the same time, they saw nothing wrong with selling my gifts without approval. A classic case of consumerist attitude towards relatives who are perceived solely as a source of material benefits. The silence in the living room grew increasingly tense. Justin and Vanessa were clearly expecting me to be the first to break the silence and announce my decision to reinstate financial support. They were used to the way any family conflict ended. I listened to their explanations, pretended to accept their arguments, and put things back on track. But today, that scenario wasn't working. I continued to stand at the window, watching Miguel work in the garden. The elderly Mexican was pruning the rose bushes, carefully collecting the cut branches in a special cart. His every move was deliberate and economical, the result of years of experience and an understanding of how to properly care for plants. Unlike the people sitting in my living room, Miguel knew how to create something beautiful and useful with his own hands. Dad, are you even going to answer anything? Justin couldn't take it anymore. We came here to have a serious conversation, and you are silent like a gorilla under interrogation. A gorilla under interrogation. That's an interesting comparison. I am a captured enemy being interrogated by the just authorities. In their understanding, it was me who did wrong by blocking cards and stopping transfers, and they are the victims of my incomprehensible and unjustified behavior. I'm listening, I said without turning from the window. So far, you've told me about your plans to move to Austin and that you have the legal right to sell the house I gave you. Is there anything else? Vanessa got up from the couch and walked over to me. She had clearly decided to change tactics from explanatory to emotional. Her voice had the intonation of a hurt child who didn't understand why she was being punished. Walter, I don't understand what's happening to you, she said, trying to look me in the eye. You've never been so cruel. We've always been able to rely on you, and now all of a sudden you're treating us like strangers. Cruel. Another interesting definition of my behavior. Ending financial support for adults who are capable of working and supporting themselves is seen as cruel. A logic only available to those who are used to living solely at other people's expense. How am I supposed to feel about people who sell my gifts without letting me know? I asked, finally turning to them. It's not a gift, Justin snapped at me. You bought us a house to live in. We lived there for 5 years. Isn't that enough? Do we have to sit there for the rest of our lives out of gratitude? Not a gift. That's an interesting interpretation of the situation. It turns out that the house worth $200,000 was not a gift, but something like temporary housing, which I gave them for use. And now the lease is up, and they have the right to dispose of the property as they see fit. Justin, I said as calmly as possible, if it wasn't a gift, what was it? My son had clearly not expected such a direct question. He hesitated and looked at Vanessa for support, but she looked confused too. Apparently, they hadn't discussed this aspect of the situation in preparation for the conversation. Well, it was help, he said uncertainly. Ichkran, you helped us with housing when we didn't have the money to buy our own house. We're very grateful for that. But times have changed. We have other plans. Housing assistance? $200,000 turned into housing assistance. And 5 years of living rent-free in a house that I also maintained at my own expense, paying taxes, insurance, and utilities is just the natural order of things, requiring no special thanks. What are you going to do with the money from the sale of the house if I don't give you the extra money to move? I inquired. This question caused them to look at each other again. Apparently, they had not seriously considered the option of refusing to fund their plans. In 5 years, I had never refused to help them, so they took my support for granted. Then we'll look for cheaper options, Vanessa said. Maybe not in downtown Austin, but in the suburbs, or an apartment for a while until we get back on our feet. Get on our feet. In 5 years, they still haven't gotten back on their feet, despite constant financial support and no major financial problems. What would have to change in Austin for them to suddenly become self-sufficient and successful? Dad, Justin tried to return to the emotional impact. I understand that you're upset about our decision to sell the house. Maybe we really should have talked to you first. But at the end of the day, it's our life, and we have the right to make our own decisions. Our lives, our decisions. Pretty words that hide the desire to get all the benefits of autonomy without being responsible for the consequences. They want to make their own decisions, but I still have to fund those decisions. Good, I said. Then keep making decisions. And fund them yourself. My words had the effect of a bomb going off. Justin and Vanessa looked at me as if I had said something unthinkable. Apparently, they had hoped until the last moment that the conversation would end with a compromise and partial restoration of financial support. You can't be serious, Vanessa whispered. You're not going to leave us in this situation. We're your family. Family. That word sounded like the last argument in an argument they were clearly losing. But what does family mean to people who have spent 5 years treating me solely as a source of money? Who make important decisions without regard for the opinion of whoever is funding those decisions? If we're family, I said, why are you acting like strangers? Strangers also have the right to sell real estate given to them without consulting the donor, but they don't require ongoing financial support. Justin got up from the couch and started pacing around the room. His composure had finally left him, and now he looked like a cornered man who didn't know what to do next. Dad, you're putting us in a hopeless situation, he said, stopping in front of me. Sapashonon, we can't live without your help. We have no other sources of income, no savings, nothing. If you refuse to support us, we won't survive. We won't survive. Dramatic exaggeration again. Worst case scenario, they would have to sell the house, rent a cheap apartment, and find a job. Unpleasant, but doable for healthy adults. What's stopping you from getting a job? I asked. I'm 38 years old, Justin exclaimed. At that age, it's too late to start a career from scratch. Employers prefer young employees who are willing to work for pennies. And I have certain needs, habits, standards of life. Certain standards of life. That was the crux of the problem. My son believed that he was entitled to a certain level of comfort, regardless of whether he could provide it himself. And if his own abilities weren't enough, someone else should cover the difference. Tell me honestly, I said, glancing back and forth at Justin and Vanessa. How do you treat me? Not as a father or a father-in-law, but just as a person? The question was unexpected and direct. They clearly hadn't prepared themselves to answer something like that. Justin opened his mouth to say something but stopped, realizing that any catchphrases about love and respect would sound false after everything that had happened. We love you, Dad, he said uncertainly. You know we do. Then explain to me why the people who love me are making important decisions about the real estate I donated without letting me know. Silence again. Vanessa nervously rubbed the edge of her dress. Justin stared at the floor. They realized they were in a desperate situation. Any answer to that question would only make their situation worse. We just didn't think it was that important, Vanessa finally said. For us, it was just a house we lived in. We didn't think that selling it would upset you. We didn't. In their 5 years together, they hadn't realized that a man who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on them could be upset about selling a gift house without his knowledge. It spoke either of their amazing stupidity or their complete indifference to my feelings. Okay, I said. One last question then. If I die tomorrow, what will you do? This question made an even stronger impression on them than all the previous ones. Justin turned pale. Vanessa shook her hands. Daddy, don't say such thing, exclaimed his son. There's nothing wrong with you. You're healthy. You have many years ahead of you. Answer the question, I insisted. They looked at each other again, obviously not knowing what to say. My question made them think about something they had never seriously considered, the need to live on their own. We would manage somehow, Justin said uncertainly. We'd get jobs, save money. People live on their own somehow. We'd manage somehow. Get a job. They'd save money. All the things they could do now but didn't want to because of the more comfortable option of parental support. The silence in the living room dragged on, becoming increasingly awkward. Justin and Vanessa sat on the couch, clearly waiting for me to be the first to break the pause and announce my decision. Their faces were a mixture of hope and anxiety. They still believed they could convince me to reinstate my financial support. But today the situation was fundamentally different. The for sale sign outside the house I had given my son was the last straw in a series of disappointments. For 5 years, I had maintained the illusion that I was helping a young family get back on their feet and become self-sufficient. In reality, I was just funding their unwillingness to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. Justin, I said, not turning away from the window, tell me honestly, when was the last time you worked full-time? The question caught him off guard. I heard him fidget on the couch, probably trying to remember or think of a suitable answer. What do you mean? He asked uncertainly. I'm doing something all the time. Freelancing, projects, consulting. When was the last time you received a stable salary for a full-time job in an office or a company? I clarified. Now the pause lingered for a long time. Justin clearly understood where this conversation was going and didn't want to give a straight answer. Probably 4 years ago, my son finally admitted, but the job market has changed. Many people work remotely now, running their own projects. It's a modern approach to career. 4 years ago. So the last year of life in the gifted house, he did not officially work anywhere. Yet he continued to receive monthly remittances from me, which covered all his expenses. I turned and looked closely at the couple. Justin, 38 years old, college educated, no major health problems. Vanessa, 34 years old, also a healthy and educated woman. Both are quite capable of earning a living, but prefer to exist at my expense. Saukonowi. You know what I've realized in these 5 years? I said, sitting back in my chair. I realized that my help to you only harms you. Instead of encouraging you to develop and become self-reliant, it has turned you into people who are unable to support themselves without help. That's not true, Vanessa flared up. We try very hard to be independent. It just doesn't happen all at once. It takes time to find your niche, to develop your business. My decision is final, I said. Financial support will cease completely and permanently. All automatic transfers are canceled, credit cards are blocked. You will not receive any more money from me. My words had the effect of a lightning strike. Justin jumped up from his seat. Vanessa splashed her hands. You can't do this, screamed my son. We're your family. You have an obligation to us. My obligations were to get you a good education and help you get back on your feet, I replied. I've done that. From now on, you have to live on your own, Vanessa cried. Not the neat tears she sometimes let out to accomplish her goals, but real sobs of despair. Apparently, it was only now that she realized that the financial prosperity she was used to was over for good. Dad, think again, Justin asked. We are ready to change our behavior, to become more responsible. Give us another chance. You've had a chance, I said. 5 years of chances. There won't be any more. I stood up from my chair, signaling that the conversation was over. Justin and Vanessa stood up too, realizing that further entreaties were useless. They slowly made their way toward the exit, still hoping that I would change my mind at the last moment. We're leaving Texas, Justin said, stopping in the doorway. We'll move to another state, and you won't see us again. It's your choice, I replied. Justin nodded, took Vanessa under his arm, and they walked out of the house. Through the window, I watched them get into the car and sit for a long time without starting the engine. Finally, the engine started, and the black SUV slowly drove out of my yard. It was probably our last meeting, but I felt no sadness or regret. Only relief that I had finally stopped being an ATM and was back to being just a man who was entitled to respect from those he helped.